Roswell. I'm Joe Neeb, City Manager, and with me today I have Najar, our City Engineer, and Juan Fuentes, Administrative Service Director. Today, for this public forum, we are going to talk about the Street and Roads Improvement Project funding. And all a mouthful, but we'll take it easy, and we'll walk all the way through with that. For this segment, we want to talk a little bit about making sure that everybody understands what's involved in the roads, what is involved in maintaining this infrastructure, how many miles do we have, and all of that. And so I'm going to lean heavily up on our city engineer in order to cover a lot of those statistics and detail. And then Mr. Fuentes will help with some of what we're recommending for our budget for fiscal year 2022. And so, gentlemen, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So Louis, my first questions are very, very basic into that system and everything. Is that so? We utilize the roads within the city right away. They're all asphalt. They have concrete shoulders or curbing and everything. Let's start with exactly how many miles of streets do we have within the city of Roswell?
The city of Roswell, we have 317 centerline miles. I say centerline miles because some are 2-lane, and we do have a few 4 lanes. Also, there's 4 classifications that we use in conjunction with the Mexico DOT, Mexico Department of Transportation, who we rely heavily on funding for some of the primary arterial streets, which are the highways. And then we have the minor arterial streets, which would be something like North Union. You have your collector streets, which would be something like Jaffa on the south side. And then, of course, you have your local residential streets. So we have those 4 categories that we use for classification.
Okay. Now on those primary arterials that you talked about, they're can you explain the designation with the state and how they're recognized and how the state actually helps with the primary arterials? Because I'm assuming that's like Main Street, and we have a few other connectors, I think.
Correct. The primary arterial streets are 2nd Street, city limit to city limit, which is US 380 on the east side and US 70 and 380 on the west side. We also have Main Street, parts of Southeast Main when you come into town from the south, and then starting in McGaffey, Main Street going to the north. How we interact with the Mexico DOT, that's technically their right of way. So even if you want to put in a new business and get a driveway, it's a double. It takes 2 entities to review it and approve it. But the DOT has the utmost authority on the primary arterials, which is 2nd and Main Street. They also have authority on Atkinson. Atkinson is New Mexico 256, and Atkinson is from McGaffey, the city limits, all the way up to College. And then, of course, College is the truck route between Main Street and Atkinson Street. But the DOT, every year we apply for what we call a cooperative project, which is a co-op project, and we try to go 50-50 with them to do some work. Most recently, and we're still finishing, everybody's like the stuff we did on Main Street between College and Country Club, and we did a Nova chip, and then we striped it. But thanks to the cooperation of the DOT, it was basically a 50-50 project.
Now, we just completed a portion of Atkinson to the south, I believe south of 2nd Street, and that was the state DOT doing a lot of that work?
The South Atkinson project was the project that the city competed with the other entities within Southeast New Mexico, and we're part of the Southeast New Mexico Transportation Planning Authority Organization, which is a COG, Council of Governments. And in 2016, we competed for that project, and we had the scoring, and we got that project. That was 85% federal funded, and that was 15% city funded. On that street, basically, is what we call mill it out and fill with 3 inches of hot mix. And then we also did ADA improvements at the intersections. We redid some driveways, and we did the sidewalk. Okay. And that was all federal money.
All right. So for those of you watching, we will have a segment at the end for questions and everything. But so going off of that a little bit farther, you had already mentioned this cooperative program with the state. And I know at the city council meeting, you've also used the term call for projects. Can you explain both of those entities?
The cooperative projects or the co-op projects are a yearly thing. So every year, and usually in February, March, the New Mexico Department of Transportation and local district, which are District 2 here in Roswell. And congratulations, Francisco Sanchez, on becoming the district engineer recently named. Way to go, Francisco. We put in for projects. This year, we put in for College Street, and we have the offer letter. Again, it'll be 50-50. We'll be doing a Nova chip like we did on North Main, on College from Maine to Atkinson. And that's going to be about $400,000. So the DOT's putting up $200,000. We're putting up $200,000 to get that done. So that's the cooperative. That's the yearly thing, a co-op project. Right now, what we're having, what we call a call for projects. So in 2019, the DOT had a similar call for projects funded through legislature. And what happens, every entity can put in for projects as many as they want, but they want to be shovel ready. By definition, a shovel ready, according to DOT, is that you can advertise the project in 30 days. The city of Roswell, we're very fortunate that we have an engineering department, we have a staff, so we have 4 projects that are shovel ready. But in 2019, we put in some projects. The project that we were fortunate to get was the Country Club and Main traffic signal. This year, we're putting in for 4 projects. We want to put in for Atkinson, which would be phase 3 from Cherry to College. We want to widen Hobson from East Earl Cummins to 285. We also want to do a Nova chip on Main Street, continue to focus on Main Street because that's our main thoroughway. And that would be a Nova chip from McGaffey to College to tie in what we just did, and that's 2 miles. And hopefully that should be a top project, maybe in the eyes of the district and also in the eyes of the governor and cabinet secretary. And then the 4th project that we're putting in for is a mill and fill on West McGaffey from our city limits on Wyoming east to Union. Those of you that take care and pay attention to our requests, that was one of the top 5 projects we submitted to legislature. Unfortunately, it was not selected, but we did get another bridge on North Garden right there on the entrance to the Roswell Livestock. Yeah. So thank you, legislature, for giving us $889,000 for that project.
So as we move into this, we'll be talking about a lot of different pots of money for this. There's a program out there with the legislature called the ICIP.
Correct.
And so that is we put that in for that every year. We're looking for projects that we can improve something within the city of Roswell. And then that's voted on by the legislature, and then the governor has final approval on that. Now, and then you've talked about the 2 other programs out there. The co-op is a more regional level.
Correct.
And that is a 50-50 match.
Typically, it's a 75-25 match.
25.
I try to go 50-50 because Roswell, I found out that if you put in 50%, the DOT is more receptive to that.
Okay. And so that's that regional money that gets spent on the streets and everything. And then you talked about this call for projects, which is through, it still goes through the DOT, but it comes from a different pot of money.
Legislature set aside some money through the DOT. I think it's $100 million this year. Right. But every entity, every village, county, city, everybody will be putting in a project. So typically, there's 400 projects put in, and maybe 60 are selected.
Sure, and so that's all of the state funding that comes in. I think every once in a while we'll get involved in a federal project, occasionally for different.
The federal projects, what we used to get to was our local council of governments. That fund is frozen right now.
Okay.
The last project was awarded in 2018, which is the North Atkinson project, which we're going to open bids on June 13th, and that's from 2nd to Cherry. So that was the last project that was awarded in this southeast part of the state.
Okay, and then so that's talking about everybody else's money, and then the rest of this work comes from our own money, yeah. Through property taxes, gross receipts tax. I believe those are the primary ones. Juan, is that what other funds do we bring that money from for that?
Sure, Joe. So for roads, in addition to the gas, there's a gasoline tax as well that gets deposited directly into the road fund for any road-related operations or capital improvement. You mentioned gross receipts tax, of course, and then the property tax and And we touched on some of the other funding sources, like the state appropriation that the legislators, allocated for the projects such as North Garden project, as well as any other pots of money that might be out there, whether it's state funding sources or, as Louis mentioned, New Mexico Department of Transportation, DOT money that we use for all of these different type of projects. Just to kind of give a general overview for this year, I think we were very fortunate that we not only were matching some of the state money, but as you mentioned, we used some of our own money. In our budget for fiscal year 22, what's being recommended to the council, it is over, I believe, $6 million of city money that is putting towards road improvements, in addition to about $2 million of state money. So it combined, we're looking at about $9 million of road improvements for the upcoming fiscal year.
Okay. All right. And we'll talk about the budget here in just a little bit as well, too, because I think one of the things that we did with the budget this year is that we tried to make sure that all the road funding, no matter whether it's just operational, whether it's the capital improvements and everything, rolled together in one line item to kind of help track it a little bit better. Because, Louis, it's been about 2 years now, I think, since we did a road inspection, road inventory. And I think we're still utilizing that document now. So it's been a year and a half to 2 years, I believe.
It was completed in 2019. The report was given in 2020. But we are using that report, the pavement condition analysis, to generate some of these streets that we're doing. I mean, because they did go and they tested and drove all our streets, evaluated all 317 miles. They gave us a 5-year plan. So what we're trying to do right now is go off the first-year plan, sometimes on the second-year plan, but that's how we're picking a lot of streets, along with if you see it on Facebook, you hear it on the complaints of all the concerns of people. South Washington, North Washington, yes, they're on the list this year. I know those are some of the ones that I've always get concerns about, but they were on the list. West McGaffey was on the list. That's why I made the ICIP project one of the top 5 projects of the legislature. So we use that list. Every now and then there'll be a main break or a weather event that might cause us to change the street.
Sure.
But we're trying to follow the recommendations. And of course, our streets department, led by Quinn Miller, they're out there every day sweeping, crack sealing, potholes, and they know which streets are using up more of the materials. And so we'll look at that and sometimes have to shift the street to adjust to that.
You know, I know that we had some of our armchair quarterbacks, for lack of a better whatever I can call them, but when we got done with that inspection and plan for all of the streets, the question was, well, all you have to do is drive them and you can see how bad they are. I think this inventory, this inspection program actually went a little deeper than that, because it had a weighted piece of equipment that drove everything, testing all the compaction of the asphalt and down in there. And I think that's the thing that not everybody understands. We have so many different roads. I think the classification ran from a level 1 to a level 10, I believe. And I don't remember which way that goes for best to worst. Is it level 1 the best, or?
A level 1's the best.
Okay. And then a level 10 is the worst.
Correct.
And I've always looked at the levels of essentially 7, 8, 9, and 10, and probably 8, 9, and 10 more than anything else. These are the ones that have failed underneath the asphalt. This is where this base course that's underneath there. And so probably for the viewers, Louis, why don't we talk about the makeup of a street? What are the different layers within our standards?
The different layers of the street are, you have your subgrade, which is the native material that's there in the area. In some parts of town, the native material is old farmland, which is a lot of clay, which over the years swells and shrinks depending on the moisture. On top of the native material, we have what we call the sub base, which sometimes we bring in borrow material if we're raising the road. On top of that, you'll have the base course, which is your compacted gravel, which is usually about 6 inches of gravel. And then on a residential street or a road it's not a collector or arterial, we have 4 inches of hot mix. On the primary streets, we'll put in 6 inches of hot mix. It seems like a lot, but you got to remember that we're planning ahead not only for the service life, but for the maintenance life. 15 years, 20 years down the road, you want to have a material so then you can come in and you can mill it. Because if you don't have enough material, which we found out a few years ago, some of the old streets in the south part of town in South Union, South Washington, when we tried to mill 3 inches, that's all the pavement there was. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I understand what they did years ago, but it's, and of course you're trying to, economics, trying to match the money and how much can you do with your money. And it's a constant challenge all the time.
So yeah, within that inspection inventory is that there's different layers within a base of the road. And I guess the goal would be then is to not lose the base course underneath it, not lose everything that's underneath there, and just deal with that asphalt layer, that hot mix layer. And the more often that you deal with that, one, it's less expensive than rebuilding an entire road when you're having to pull out the base and come back through that. And so you're trying to stay up on that asphalt. The example that you gave where there wasn't enough asphalt, that happens in the past. I mean, you don't know exactly what's there until you do core samples and try to find out what's there. And so I think that's I think that's something that everybody watching should understand. We are looking at these streets in layers, and so when the inspection was done, we're trying to figure out exactly which streets that you would tackle first. And of course, the most expensive ones are a full reconstruction of the streets.
That is correct.
That's where you're having to pull everything out of that channel and then put everything back in there. I think the goal that you've been very successful with in the last few years anyway is the hot mix recycling. And maybe we should talk about what are those different things that we're doing now, because I think our goal is we're aiming for most of the streets that are on that list are in that mid-range of that scale. Is that correct?
Well, most of the streets are in the mid-range of the scale, and pavement maintenance 101, you try to save the patients that can be saved first, and you put your efforts in that. I look at this as kind of like battlefield triage. You try to save the ones that you can save the best first. So this year, and people, if you've been paying attention around town, because we covered all the quadrants of town. We did some hot recycling. That was the hot train that you saw that looked like a big old train and superheating it. Then we covered that up with microsurfacing. So that was a 1-2 punch for those. And then we just finished the Nova chip on North Main. So we used those 3 processes already this spring. Sure. And with the program this year, we're going to try to mill and fill Garden Street from 2nd to Cherry, which has been on a concern for quite a while, and also South Washington from McGaffey to Alameda. So we're going to mill out 3 inches and put in 3 inches, and that should help keep that street going for hopefully another 20 years.
You've been an engineer for a long time, Louis, and with that, what have you discovered? What is wearing our roads down the most? I mean, what is actually causing it? Because everybody out there, you can go out on the road, you can look at the alligatoring, which is the cracks that begin on there, starts to break down the asphalt. I know a lot of that is moisture driven, but exactly, let me restart my question with, what is the life expectancy of a road in Roswell?
The life expectancy of a road now should be about 40 years. With the design and the construction techniques that we're doing now. What people don't realize is that, let's say I build a brand new road from the ground up, and it always starts from the ground up. Within 3 to 5 years, if you follow the protocol for textbook pavement management, we should be putting a fog seal, which is just shooting it with oil. And then in the first 8 years, we'd put a microsurfacing. So pavement maintenance and extending the service life starts within 3 to 5 years after you've done a brand new road. And that's hard for the citizens and our politicians to understand, because they said, we just built the road. But it's kind of like you have a brand new car. If you want it to last, you start changing the oil, keeping it clean, and everything else, servicing from the beginning.
So what are those things that help break down the road?
Besides the subgrade failure, what's underground, there's moisture under there. But what I see over here, those that are watering the street's not going to grow. The water is the worst enemy, because it gets into the crack, it gets into the foundation, it gets behind the curb. So please watch your watering. The other thing that we see is heavy trucks going to the neighborhoods, going to the certain streets. Union Avenue is a prime example. We did that in 2010. We had to go do it again. But if you've ever watched all the concrete trucks and all the trucks, of course, all the construction's up north, and I understand it, and Union is a minor arterial street, but overloaded trucks and everything else. That's why when I see a semi in a residential area, from my point of view, they're also doing damage to the streets because the local streets aren't as thick. And we had an old saying that was taught to me by an old engineer: a truck that is 10% overloaded does 100% damage. So
Sure.
overloads and moisture are probably the two big culprits that we have.
Okay. And so now, Juan, we moved operations into the road fund so that we could keep it identified. About how much did we put in there? What is the operation cost? And I'll explain my questions here in just a little bit. But about how much are we putting in there for those operations? So if we have 9 million for the streets and we have a $15 million budget, I believe we're
about
almost
13 million total
Okay.
budget for the
Okay.
road fund. So we're looking at about 4 million on the operational side, which
Okay.
include personnel as well as all of your daily operations activities.
There's quite a bit of work, and I think that goes back to what Lewis was saying as well too. Is that we have a whole staff out there that is continuously running this over 300 miles of streets. I would even call the sweeping of the streets as probably a preventative maintenance activity.
It is. It's preventive maintenance because you're keeping it clean. If you get any kind of moisture, just the grit on there will just start sanding down the street.
So like rocks in your tires and everything, it starts to cut that asphalt over time, and the heavy trucks and everything else.
The other thing that people don't realize is we have 317 miles of centerline miles of street. We also have that or a little bit more of alleys. And we have our street department crews that are trying to keep the alleys going because a lot of the trash pickup and secondary access to some of the houses is going to the alleys. So they have the streets to take care of. They have the alleys to take care of. They have all the mowing and the right-of-ways. You've seen them spray for Roundup, or not. They don't use Roundup anymore, but they spray for weeds in the medians and just trying to do all sorts of maintenance. It's part of the street maintenance because
Right.
that helps keep our streets alive. And of course, for the public, you want to have that nice-looking street. So when somebody comes into Roswell, we want a first impression when you look at our primary streets that, hey, Roswell's got some good-looking streets and it's well-maintained.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that's all part of that. It's built into that operational cost and all. And so we're spending all that money on the operations. Then on top of that, I think one of the things going back to that inspection plan, in the perfect world, they looked at comparables. They looked at a lot of different sources, and I think they had a pretty big number there that was associated with, if we were to do everything to the level of what we wanted to do, that number,
$16 million.
$16 million. And so all of this work goes into that, and our budget for this next year is right at
About 13 million.
about 13 million. And now we'll move a little bit into there, and then I'll come back around for some of this other stuff. But so we're hitting about 13 million, and I think this is the best we have done for a number of years for money that has been allocated. You've been able to leverage our dollars with these grant dollars in order to do some of the partial reconstructions, some of that corrective maintenance to that. We've maintained our preventative maintenance with our crews, that they're right at the same level I think they have been. So I think pulling that all together is a very, very key piece of this thing. So this is going to be a nice year. I guess my goal would be is that are we going to be able to do better for the next years and everything? And I think that's what we're trying to figure out. We did 2 resolutions at the last city council meeting just last week, and those resolutions were essentially, I would call them indicative of the city council saying, we want to help. We want to help the city staff and everybody take care of maintaining this stuff. I think for everybody's sake, the rights of way are essentially from outside of sidewalk to outside of sidewalk. depending on whether the sidewalk is curb bound or not, I believe.
Or at the property line.
And so, so it goes right up to the property line as the right of way. And so our street crew is out there doing all of that work within the right of way, essentially. Outside of the sidewalks, if we have time, we'll talk a little bit about the sidewalks and how we maintain those, but with the streets as well too. So I'm going to go back to our armchair quarterbacks a little bit. Because, Roswell has a lot of different dynamics to it, and we hear all the time about, well, the north side is getting everything, or the south side is getting everything. I would say that our streets, I don't know how well our streets are divided from the north to the south, but I think with the list that you've been talking about today is that we try to take care of streets throughout the entire city.
We do try to take care of streets throughout this entire city, all 4 quadrants. And if you look at we do look at the list, and we try to get the primary ones. But being an experienced city engineer, experienced street superintendent, we want to try to spread the coverage in all 5 wards. So we're trying to put projects in all 5 wards. Of course, some of the arterial streets, like with the DOT, that's Main Street and that's 2nd Street. So they do cross different quadrants, but we're looking at the list. We're looking at trying to get every part of the town covered, at least a little bit of projects every year.
Yeah. Juan, would you tell us a little bit about this year's budget and the recommendation that we have, and add just a little bit more to it for where we're at with the budget? I believe we have a special council meeting on Thursday.
Yes.
So
For the preliminary budget, the state does require all of the municipalities to adopt a preliminary budget by the end of May and submitted by June 1st. So for the city of Roswell, we have developed a preliminary fiscal year 22 budget, which includes all of the funds throughout the city, but the one that we're focusing on today is roads and street improvements. So within the overall budget of the city, we have the street department that, again, as we mentioned, we talk about the operations and the personnel and a lot of the capital projects that are being recommended to the city council, which on Thursday we'll be able to have an opportunity to review a little bit closer the list of the recommended projects that are being proposed in the budget. And again, that all ties back to the sources for paying for all these projects. Not only are we going to be leveraging some of the grant money, the state appropriation money, but also some of our own money to be able to accomplish all of these projects when we start the new fiscal year on July 1st.
Okay. And so we've got a lot of information out there. Where are we going to be able to find this information? If somebody listened in and said, I want to learn more about this, where can they find all this information at?
So for the council on Thursday, we will be going over the preliminary budget. We will have a copy of the preliminary budget in its entirety, and it will be on PDF, and we will post it online. So people will have an opportunity to dive into the details and read a little bit more on how all the sources, where they come in for all the different funds that we have. And then, of course, they can definitely be able to look at what is being recommended for the roads. So it will be posted online. People will have an opportunity to download it and review it.
Okay. And so from the budget, Louis, what if we wanted to delve down into the streets and all that information? Where can we find that information?
The streets we already have our what we call our project dashboard, which shows all the projects that facility maintenance is working on and engineering is working on. We have made a map of our recommended major projects. I can put that under the engineering department website as well, so people can see a map and see some of the projects. That'll be the hot recycling, the Nova Chip, our mill and fields. So we'll have those. I do want to say that if council passes the streets that are recommended, folks, you're going to see projects year round. It's going to be our point in engineering to get these projects out and spend the money so we can ask for more money for next year.
I think that's something I've always enjoyed with what you do is that we try to get our streets, all the ideas on our streets decided early, because that helps us get the contractors in here to do the work, because we are limited on the number of contractors that do this work in New Mexico, but we want them to start with Roswell.
Yeah, we always like Roswell to be first on the list, because Roswell, we warm up in March. We try to get the hot recycling done. I mean, we're here in May, and we've already done our pavement maintenance. But this year, we're gonna try to do some in the fall and the spring, because again, thankfully with the budget numbers and what's being recommended, we'll probably have a little bit more robust pavement program than we have in the past.
All right, gentlemen, I believe that's the length of our time that we had. We'll be taking questions from from whoever's watching online at this point in time. So if you have any questions, put them through. I believe that Mr. Fuentes and Mr. Najar will be there, be available for answering those questions. Ask them anything. We should probably play a game, Stump the Engineer, right? That wouldn't be too bad. But ask them anything. They know what they're doing. We'll never get enough of the streets done, but we're going to keep trying to stay at it, because if we fall behind, it hurts more as we try to come forward. So thank you for your time.